Right. So, hello, my name is Kalpak, and uh, since uh, I was one of the speakers, or probably we discussed about having some topics to discuss today for some reason. I will quickly start. Just a basic, quick introduction. My name is Kalpak Tikumb. Yes, and I'm working as I associate director in IFM Engineering Private Limited. It's a German company in Pune. It's a subsidiary of a German company in Pune, and I am 38 years old. And my hobbies are photography, reading all sorts of things, fiction, non-fiction, uh, psychology, and so many other things. Like to go for long drives. I used to play table tennis at some point of time, but now mainly focus on simple exercises and yoga and jogging and all that. Uh, yeah. Otherwise, I like to listen to music and uh, mostly read, but yeah, photography as well. I do pretty much a lot of photography as well. Right. That's all. So without getting into too much of other things, I have prepared a few slides for the discussion, but we don't have to stick to that topic. Feel free to suggest some other topics, or um, divert the discussion at all, if at all you think this is okay. Let's not worry too much about that part. So I have, like I said, I have a couple of not couple of few slides. I'll just share my screen, and hopefully you can see that. And feel free to interrupt me or have a discussion on things, and we can discuss as we go. No problem. There's no particular apart from those few topics which I had listed down. We can always change the topic and go from one place to another. So can you see my screen now? I hope you can. I
Yes,
have. All right, thanks. So let's see how we can start. So today the different topics which we had listed in this chat on our group um, were here. Some of I think the Devdatta Patnaik video which I think Gaurav shared was quite informative in the sense, at least it listed down all the different schools of thought in there. So I have not elaborated too much there, but we could discuss a few things there. So overall, let's quickly see this slide. Essentially we probably all of us know that the name Hindu comes from Sindhu, and which is today the name of which used to be the name of what we call the Indus River today. And essentially the Indus Valley civilization was is considered to be the early place where a lot of these philosophies were born. And that's where we begin. And uh, the early time essentially which we say this all happened was before this, around 2000 years before Christ, or Common Era as it's called now, CE, BCE, before Common Era. So around the time of 2600 to 1900 BCE. But there is controversy on those topics. Some documents and books that I read uh, basically claim that all these dates have been estimated by Western scholars, and Western scholars were Christians, and they would not have liked anything before 4000 BC, because according to the Bible, the world was created 6000 years ago, which is 4000 BC, or very precisely 4004 BCE. So nothing can be older than that, obviously. So a lot of our dating of documents, early translations that the Europeans did way back in 1800s and so on, has dated everything after 4000 BC. So typically, even for Rig Veda and everything, you will get a date 3500 BC, 3000 BC, nothing older than 4000 BC. But again, that's I don't think we should rely on them. Again, I think we should, the onus on proving everything, how old it is and everything, lies on us. Uh, would not expect that a lot of voluntary agreement on those topics from other cultures. Right. So essentially, there have been more, it has been called the oldest religion in the world, and lots of the different wide-ranging schools of thought have existed. Uh, one of the topics I have here is the history, and a lot of things that have happened is all these schools of thought which used to exist today have somehow meshed together, and it's called as like Hindu philosophy. This is just one word for it, Hindu philosophy, but actually it was not so earlier, and we will see a bit of those changes in the next few slides. There's a lot of text here. There's a fair bit of reading material. I'm not going to read through the slides. I'll share this after with later with you guys, and feel free to read through it in detail. Primarily, as far as the last few maybe 100 years, or let's say 1000 years of Hinduism are concerned, the development has essentially been classification of Hinduism into primary denominations. Like every religion has primary denominations. Christianity has Orthodox Christians and Protestants, and even Roman Catholics. Islam has Shias and Sunnis. Similarly, Hindu denominations primarily are considered to be these four: Vaishnavism, Shaivism, Shaktism, and Smartism. Not Smartism, Smartism. Um, Essentially, they have some overlaps, obviously, and there are some significant differences. And the idea essentially about Hinduism is that the texts are authority, and they contain eternal truths. And of course, there is, apart from that, a very strong culture of questioning. So authority is always questioned, and the purpose of questioning is not to shake the authority, or shake the foundations of authority or challenge authority, but essentially to deepen the understanding of the truths, and to evolve the tradition, so to say, which has happened for the last hundreds of years. Quick history has been that, as I said, the pre-Vedic period, the Indus Valley civilization, which was there, is considered to be there before like 1700 or 2000 BC approximately. Then the Vedic period starts, which is considered to be the evolution period of this Hinduism, as well as later on Buddhism and Jainism, which happened until like it's considered around like 200 500 BC, around that area of time. Then it then the later period is essentially called as the Puranic period, wherein a lot of the Puranas were authored and created. There are many Purans. In one of the future slides, there is a list. Then, of course, we have Christianity coming to India a few in a couple of 1 or 2 centuries after Christ, in the 3 to 500 BC, around those times. Um, then there is something called as the Golden Age of Hinduism, which is marked with a lot of empires, but Gupta dynasty was primarily one of the main rulers, so to say, of this Indian subcontinent, and that is where this six schools of Hindu philosophy have evolved: the Sankhya, Yoga, Nyaya, Vaisheshika, Mimamsa, and Vedanta. Those six schools of thought have their own differences, have their own common points. Essentially, these are based on how knowledge is gathered, and these are Astic. By the way, all these are Astic schools of thought. We have the so-called Nastic schools of thought as well, which if you saw this Devdatta Patnaik's video, there are also those schools of thought, the Charvak school of thought, and Buddhism and Jainism as well, which are considered under all these, like total of 10 schools of thought, of which six are Astic and four are Nastic. Um, and then we also see Hinduism going eastwards towards southeast of Asia, and we have Angkor Wat, the biggest or the largest Hindu temple, which is in Cambodia. So there has been a lot of, and even now in the southeast of Asia, we have, although Malaysia, for example, is predominantly an Islamic country, even now they have their culture and plays, and a lot of dance forms and drama forms based on the Ramayana and Mahabharata. There's, of course, a lot of evidence that Hinduism went there after trade and so on. And then around this time is also where we see this Bhakti movement, the beginning of Vaishnavism, Shaivism, as well as Shaktism. All these three primarily, deity-based philosophies, so to say, which focused on a particular deity. Like obviously, Vaishnavism focuses on Vishnu, Shaivism Shiva, and Shaktism on the Devi, on Shakti. And after that period is what we see is what we call as a classical period. And there Adi Shankar, a very young philosopher who died very young at the age of 32, he consolidated all the Vedanta philosophy, Advaita Vedanta, and basically revived something called as the Smarta movement, which is based on like the Vaishnavism, Shaivism, and Shaktism are based on three gods among the Trinity. Smarta movement does not focus too much on the gods. Of course, there are forms of God. Vishnu, it acknowledges all the forms, but the primary form is the Nirgun Brahman. And then, of course, you have the Puranas and Bhakti movement grows. Buddhism goes out of India. Islam comes in India. And then in the medieval period, which is much later, then that's where a lot of Hinduism faces attack from foreign rulers. And the Vijayanagar Empire, which is now there, has come up and again falls down and so on. And all these combination, a lot of things get lost. And the Upanishads, Purans, six schools of thought, everything, kind of comes into, uh, starts becoming called as like one Hindu philosophy. The six schools of thought no longer are so distinct, and it becomes quite the boundaries are vague, very vague, and the documentation and everything kind of uh, a lot of downfall, so to say, of Hinduism also starts happening. And again, after that, it rises with the Maratha Empire, and British colonialism begins, and then it's a Renaissance period when Brahmo Samaj and the Ramakrishna Mission and a lot of other modern Hinduism. So there's a fair revival of Hinduism that begins again. And then in the later half, there is of course a lot of reform, as we social reform that we know of, like sati practice was stopped, and a lot of even casteism faced a lot of at least criticism of the caste system at least started. But of course, not so much as it did. And then in the 20th century, we have this modern Hinduism, so-called Hinduism, where we have all these. In the early 1900s, Paramahansa Yogananda went to America. He popularized yoga there quite a lot. And in the later decades, we have B.K. Iyengar, we have Raman Maharshi, we have the founder of ISKCON, Prabhupada, who also started this ISKCON movement, and J. Krishnamurti, and so many others who reformulated and reinterpreted, maybe had their own translations of our scriptures for the modern audiences. And and that's when we have the uh, movement of yoga and the Vedanta philosophy in the West, where they also gained a lot of followers. Even Osho gained a lot of followers in the West. And we have this political, how should I say, um, uh, growth of Hinduism into the mainstream politics started. I think it was to some extent realized that only the philosophical study and spirit of Hinduism is not enough. It has to be done politically as well. And that's where we have this Hindu Mahasabha creation, as well as Savarkar popularizing the Hindutva concept. So that essentially has been the primary quick history recap of. Of course, there is a lot more. I have really skimmed through it. I just tried to put in all of that into 2-3 slides. Feel free to ask me any questions or interrupt me if there are any questions. I'll move forward if there is nothing. I hope I'm not too fast, but let me know.
Kalpak, I have posted two questions in chat.
Okay. In the chat of this call, is it? Okay. Let me see. How do I see the chat? Okay, let me check.
Just take
Ah,
your
yeah.
cursor at the
Yeah,
top.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Got it. Oh, lots of things going on. Okay. Hinduism strong roots on questioning authority, but consider rude or non-believer questions. Is it because most have deviated from the original values of Hinduism? I would completely agree with that statement. Yes, we have sadly lost the argumentative culture part of Hinduism, and we are. In fact, it has been one of the biggest reasons. along with I mean, if in general, if you read any book written by most people, you will probably see this, the questioning part, and the second is the casteism part. Probably, directly, indirectly, everyone comes down to the evils of casteism for the downfall of Hinduism. But definitely questioning is a big concept, and that is exactly why we have all these schools of thought. All these 6 schools of thought we talked about, even the Nastic schools of thought, Buddhism, Jainism, all these movements, or which became religions later on, or have been basically for criticism. Buddhism was essentially mostly about criticism, that this caste and everything is pointless, and it the whole as Devdatta in his video also says that it's very practical oriented and suffering based, that if the primary goal of any religion should be reducing suffering of people. All these origin concepts and origin myths are not so important, and the nirvana concept, and even essentially personal evolution, and personal experience or personal understanding of the universe and of the world. So definitely, there is a big somehow this questioning part uh, has become very touchy, and it's a common complaint that Hindus or Indians are very thin-skinned. You oppose, or not even oppose, you just counter someone's point of view, and eventually it takes someone takes it very personally, and it's something very sad, because considering all the Nyaya philosophy discussions that we have put, I'll be putting some of those here. There is a lot of discussion on evidence, praman, and the different types of praman. So definitely, and considering atheism, there is probably the largest amount of literature on atheism is in Hinduism. So at least agnosticism, if not outright atheism, modern atheism, which basically says there is no God, at least agnosticism, that I don't know what is it. We don't know this nature of reality. We don't know. We can never find it out. Let's call it Brahman. Let's give it a personal form and call it by whatever God. But at the end of the day, it has to be experienced. Can you know it? You cannot, or it just has to be experienced, and then probably. Then you probably know it. But can you say that this is exactly how it is, and can you measure something? Probably not. So all these, in fact, in the Nyaya philosophy itself, there is a argument for not existence of God versus argument for existence of God, and those are very interesting to read actually. Mm, yes, because they don't have answers at times. Correct. Something wrong. Okay. Common values in all those 6 schools of thought are totally different. No, there are of course for common schools of thought. In fact, um, for example, even in Mimamsa versus Nyaya philosophy, there are common overlaps between things like, of course, there are some things which are completely, like Charvak is completely different. Charvak is like just your personal experience, and hardcore evidence only matters. So obviously there is a very less amount of overlap there. But for example, Nyaya and Mimamsa have overlap. So Mimamsa allows for 6 ways of accepting validity of knowledge. I think I had listed down in one of the chats. I don't have them. Let me just quickly share it, or read it out. I don't have it on. I don't have it by heart. But let me see. I can just quickly go to my PC here and find that out. Yeah. So Mimamsa basically accepts 6 modes of acceptance of knowledge, whereas Nyaya accepts only 4 out of them, and those are Praman. Uh, okay, so Pratyaksha is direct evidence. Anuman is inference. Upama is comparison. Arthapati is derivation. Anupalabdhi is non-availability of information, or non-availability of something is considered also as proof. And Shabda, which is the word of past or present experts. So these 6 are acceptable in Mimamsa. But whereas Nyaya accepts only 4 of them, which is Pratyaksha, Anuman, Shabda, and I think Upama, one of those. Yeah, Upama. Anupalabdhi, unavailability of certain something is not proof. That is not so. Nyaya basically says unavailable. If I take like one glass of seawater and I don't find sharks in it, that does not mean sharks don't exist, right? Or even today, as we see when we are searching in the universe, so far we have not found any alien life. That does not mean there is no other alien life in the universe. So you can't conclude that there is no alien life in the universe. So Anupalabdhi is not a very valid means of knowledge. So there is some overlap, and there are so what essentially, and even for yoga, for example, yoga looks at different philosophies. Yoga looks at personal experience quite a lot, and then it is about jnana concept, where where you still the mind as much as possible, and you calm down the mind as much as possible, and then you experience things, or then your the way of gathering knowledge also can be better, and so on. So everything, there are some overlaps, but not strictly so. There are some differences as well. Common values. Okay, Buddhism has opposing views. Yes, but still Buddhism accepts a lot of ideas from the Vedas as well as the Upanishads. Krishna Murti and Osho were philosophers. Can they be attributed to any contribution to Hinduism? Mm, I am not sure if I can answer that. Because J. Krishnamurti was, he came from this Theosophy movement. Uh, there's one famous lady we have read about in our history books, Annie Besant, Dr. Annie Besant. She was this part of this Theosophy movement, and J. Krishnamurti was there, and then he left it. Of course, that was I think we had discussed on chat once that he was actually, they had prophesied that there would be a world teacher, and Krishnamurti was selected to be that, and he had a so-called um, realization experience when he was like 16 or 17, I believe, and then he was chosen as this world leader, and I think once he kind of developed his own or got his bearings, essentially, he essentially said that no, arrival at the truth cannot be done through an organization, and organizing any organized effort towards realization is not going to work. And he basically left the Theosophy organization. Uh, Even now, you can get recordings of Krishnamurti and you can get his books, but they are just maintained there for posterity. They're just meant to, you're expected to listen to him, and thank you for the update. uh, yeah, and maybe just one quick point. Osho does, um, is Osho a philosopher? I would not, I don't know. I think he interpreted or probably reinterpreted a lot of the Gita and bit of the Vedanta philosophy. And I think also he did some effort of studying the Tao philosophy and the Zen Buddhism and so on. I would not call him a philosopher, but he was primarily a teacher to some extent. Yeah, maybe a philosophy here. Sure, okay, but I don't think he created his own. Maybe yeah, he created his own school of thought and so on, but primarily it was focused on no new ideas as such. Good. So let's thank you for the tip, Gaurav. It's 2:30. Let's take a quick break, and I'll be back. If you have any more questions, feel free to put it in the chat. I'll be back in 5 minutes. I don't think there was a name, um, because it was never like one organized religion, right? What we call today as Hinduism or Sanatan Dharma was never one organized religion. It was always a collection of ideas, and like there were schools of thought which we discussed, like Sankhya was there, Mimamsa was there, and everyone subscribed to different schools of thought. Like for example, today we have this Bhakti movement also, which prefer people say we are Shiva worshippers, we are Vishnu worshippers, we are Devi worshippers. So there has always been. I don't think there was one. So today the problem of this classification is always comes with the Western concepts, that under Christianity you have so-called Roman Catholicism, you have Protestants, and you have Orthodox Christians, and then again there's this evangelical Christianity. Again, like I think this. I think there was no name because that's exactly the problem. Nobody knew what to call it. Uh, and in fact, there's a very nice essay that I would encourage everyone to read. I'll try to find out the link for it. It's written by B.R. Ambedkar. Ambedkar wrote a very nice commentary, on his own apprehensions and so on. Particularly, there is one article called as "The Riddle of Hinduism," and that's exactly where B.R. Ambedkar also discusses this same thing, that what do you when you say I'm a Christian, for example, then it's very clear, Christ. There's no doubt about it. Maybe there are different interpretations, how much importance you give to Mother Mary, and which particular apostles do you follow, and that's where the difference between how do you say that comes. But it's very clear, it's Christ. When you say Islam, it's very clear, it's Muhammad, and he is the last prophet, and there are no two opinions about it. But even under Hinduism itself, like if you say Brahman, okay, fair enough. I mean, okay, the major schools of thought accept Brahman, but not everyone does. Charvak doesn't believe in anything. They said, what are you talking about? So there is no real. I don't think there was any time in a name. Then now, after all these years, when it's got grouped under one umbrella, then I believe we have all these that we have. So when I started on the first slide with denominations under Hinduism, it's a very modern construct. So yeah, I think. Okay, no questions that I saw. Let me know if I missed something, but I'll move to the next slide. Okay, yeah, it's not.
Kalpak, I just have one question.
Yes.
Kalpak, like when we talk about Hinduism, there is a lot of talk about Brahma and Vishnu, Mahesh, and like a lot of stories revolving around them. And I mean, a lot of texts related to Mahabharata, Ramayana, and everything. Like which is what I have heard my parents, grandparents, and all. And even like in temples also we see all these images. So
yes,
what is the reason why like there is a very less discussion, or it's I will say it is a very hidden discussion on the Mimansa, Nyaya, or all these things? I mean, why
very
it's
sad.
not
Yeah,
in a
it's very
general,
sad.
why it's not in a general discussion? I mean, maybe in temples, why don't they talk about this, or maybe organize some sessions on this?
Very frankly,
is it because like this will shake their belief system? Like maybe people will start asking questions, and maybe it will disrupt the entire society.
I think it's not that purely. Maybe there is some element of that aspect as well. But I think primarily it is the influence of the Bhakti movement. Devotion took on a very large influence, or not took on a very large, or it became a very important concept of Hinduism, what we see today. So therefore, I think that's where we see, that it's unquestioned devotion. In fact, I've dealt with that topic in a bit in the future more slides. Let's quickly look at it. In fact, let me just say, where was it? Is it in the? Yeah, like I said, in the medieval period here, the Bhakti movement also, one of the changes that happened was that the Bhakti movement, although they acknowledged the abstract concept of Brahman, obviously, but it took on a more monotheistic flavor, which you can to some extent see in Christianity and Islam. That there's one God, and devotion to that God is the primary expectation. So that is a influence of the Bhakti movement, and I think primarily that is probably one of the biggest reasons for this unquestioning attitude also that probably has gone. And then you see, and that's where you see that Smartism that you see here, uh, unfortunately, that's very limited to Brahmins, the Smarta philosophy. Although that is there, but I don't know what I have read so far. Essentially, is that the active followers of Smartism are barely 10% among the Hindus. There is some movement there which is like overlapping of the Shaivism and Smartism. That's where Lord Ganesha comes in, and that's where that spirit of inquiry and those kind of things are a bit encouraged. In fact, maybe one example I should give you, this Ardhanareshwar Swarup that we see, right? Shiva and Parvati in one form. That is a creation of Smartism. Then there was one more topic. So essentially, these guys are they touch the boundaries and they tend to offend people. Yes, but in general, in the Bhakti movement, yes, questioning is a. I mean, it's quite obvious, right? The focus is on devotion, not on the questioning attitude, so to say. So. Yeah, I would say that's probably one reason, but I could be wrong. There could be other things, but my personal opinion is essentially it's more of the Bhakti movement, and that has been like there for more than a century, or sorry, more than almost a millennium, right? This we see this year, right? It's almost like 1,200, 1,000 BC, so it's almost there for 2,000 plus years, or no, easily 1,000 years. Sorry, 1,000 years. So it's a pretty old movement, and uh, in fact, we'll deal with one interesting topic in the few slides. So yeah, these we know, of course, Brahma, Vishnu, Shiva, the creator, preserver, destroyer, and their feminine counterparts. Then we talked about the 33 gods. We have had a long discussion there. And in general, these are the topics on the gods. Essentially, Brahma is practically not worshipped. Very few temples. Shiva and Vishnu and Shakti have their own sects, Vaishnavism, Shaivism, and Shakti movement. Ganesha has no mention in the Vedas and the Vedic literature. The only mention he has, the earliest mention he has is, as in the Mahabharata, as the writer of the Mahabharata, when Vedavyas wanted to get it written. We again had a long discussion on our chat as well on this topic on our group. And then it's after the Puranas that's where Ganesha starts increasing his importance, and his importance grows. And formally, Adi Shankar added Ganesha as part of the 5 top deities of Hinduism, with Vishnu, Shiva, Ganesha, Surya, and Shakti. So Surya got added as well, and Smarta tradition added Ganesha as one of the primary gods of Hinduism, the 5 primary gods of Hinduism. And that is from where, and that's pretty late addition. So Ganesha is not a Vedic god at all. In fact, there's only one word called Ganpati in Rig Veda, but that Ganapati is like Lord of the Ganas, but it's not meant to refer to Ganesha at all. The elephant-headed god, as we see today, that is a very late creation. And that is where, the Smarta tradition has been poking on the boundaries of all these devotion movements and, inserting, so-called some sort of, how should I say, making some refactoring once in a while in the belief systems and so on. Right. So we talked about those topics. Feel free to change the topic, but then I was going to cover this list of important scriptures. So there are lots of them. Vedas, Upanishad, Agamas, Vedangas, Itihas, which is Ramayana and Mahabharata, Purans, Bhashya, Subhashit, Shastras, and Sutras. We'll look into what are these in more detail. So obviously, Vedas are considered the most important. Almost every school of thought accepts the Vedas. The Rig Veda, the Yajurveda, Samaveda, Atharveda, and every Vedas have 4 subdivisions, and that's why Upanishads are the last part of Vedas, the Vedanta philosophy as we call it. So basically, Upanishads basically say all those, in each Veda there are Upanishads. So Samhitas, Aranyakas, Brahmanas, these all are the commentaries on the various rituals, sacrifices, and what all one should do. And then Upanishads basically say ki ye to theek hai, but original philosophy kya hai, or what is the spirit behind doing all these rituals, that gets discussed in the Upanishads. And that's why Vedanta philosophy, or the end of Vedas, or the conclusion of the Vedas, or the goal towards what the Vedas are leading you to, that is the Vedanta. And that essentially is this philosophy and the meditation and the spiritual knowledge and, essentially self-realization, basically. So that essentially is and that is accepted by practically every school of thought in Hinduism. Agamas are, they have some commentaries on, again, like it's a parallel school of thought as well, but that accepts also yoga and temple construction and all these. There are different kinds of documents in there. So each of the Shaiva, Vaishnava and Shakta traditions have their own agamas as well. So Vedas, Upanishads and Agamas, those are the primary so-called, and Purana, of course, Puran, sorry. Purana is also a very important topic. Who are the authors of Vedas? Oh, there are no authors of Vedas. Vedas are considered as something called in Hinduism as a Shruti. Shruti means heard. That's something that is heard, which means, or in a way, it's kind of like inspired. You know, that in a very deep meditative state, they were realized truths, and they were expressed in a language. The grammar was developed to express those kind of truths, and they were memorized, and they were passed on from generation to generation of the priests and so on. And is Vedvyas not related with Vedas? He is a consolidator. He is an author. He is not an author as in the person who was inspired by the Vedas. He was the person who consolidated all this information and, you know, collected it all together. And that's where and Vedvyas apparently is considered one person, one immortal person. But like in general, Vyas is not one person. Vyas is a title. It's like Shastri. So there can be many Shastris, right? So there have been many Vyasas, and again, that is part of, that has like blurry history and blurry mythology. So in some schools of thought, it's basically said Vedvyas is an immortal fellow, and, you know, he was the person who consolidated everything. But for certain, it's not authored by one person. The Vedas have, so that's also the primary difference between Hinduism and the so-called other organized religion. There's no prophet. There is no one founder of the religion. Yes, these are the important documents. I hope you can see this. Can you see this chat window? Yeah, okay. I think I have everything on the screen. So we have the Puranas, different lots of Puranas here, of which Bhagavad Puran, Garuda Puran, these are pretty known. People at least have heard of those. But each of those, Brahma Puran, Vaishnav Puran, and Shaiva Puran are there. Shastras are there. You have Nyaya Shastra, Dharma Shastra, you have Yoga Shastra, you have Kama Shastra, you have Moksha, Artha Shastra. All these Shastras are there. Sangit, then you have these, Kavya Shastra and Natya Shastra as well. So Natya Shastra defines a lot of theater and dance, and, you know, how what a director should do, and the composition of music, and Sangeet Shastra also. So all these are also important scriptures available in our culture. Yes. Yes, Agama literature is also available in Jainism, correct. Then you have sutras, obviously, lots of there. Yoga sutras are the Patanjali Yoga Sutras, Sankhya Sutra, Nyaya Sutra is there, Mimamsa Sutras are there. Then, of course, the famous Kama Sutra is there, and Artha Sutras are also there. So these are also additional scriptures which basically expound the idea in more detail, and, you know, they are very focused on certain topics. So Nyaya Sutra and Mimamsa Sutra, there are already available modern translations of these books available as well. In fact, I have read one of the books of Nyaya Sutra written by a Bengali author. That was a bit long ago, but yeah, it's a good book. I'll try to send a link. It's quite good. And then, of course, Kama Sutra is also a good book. Actually, one should read it. It's not just about it's not just about an erotic literature. It's actually a very nice book on self-confidence, on emotional fulfillment in relationships. I would encourage people to read Kama Sutra as well. It's not just about sex. Then there are some must reads. I found these from a nice video on YouTube. He's a Marathi fellow. He's a PhD in Sanskrit, and a very well respected guy. Did a lot of translations. So these are like must reads that are recommended. Obviously, these are more focused on in this area of the country. So obviously, North India or South India, you might find some changes based on the books and so on. But primarily, it's like Prasthan Trai. This basically means, or Prasthan. Basically, Prasthan means to embark, on a journey. Prasthan kiya humne. So Prasthan basically means when you start your journey on something, what you should do, what should you be doing, and in that format, so there are something called as a Vedic Prasthan Trai, and Prasthan Trai means there is a trilogy or triad, combination of three. So the Vedic Prasthan Trai is basically the Upanishads. Of course, there are many Upanishads, more than 200 Upanishads, of which at least those 10 or 12 or 13 Upanishads, which are called as the Mukhya Upanishads. Those, the Brahma Sutras and the Bhagavad Gita. One must read at least these documents. And by the way, Upanishads are not very big. Huh? This Isha Upanishad, Kena Upanishad, Kathopanishad, these are pretty small documents. These are not like big volumes of books. So they're quite compact. So like even reading 10 Upanishads is not like such a big thing. Of course, to understand them, it's a different topic. But yeah, I will do that. Yes, I will share the video. But this book that at least one should read these 10 Mukhya Upanishads or 12 Mukhya Upanishads, the Brahma Sutras and the Bhagavad Gita is like a must. On the Purana side, Puranic, again there is on a trilogy, triad of the Puranas, of which one must read Ramayana, Mahabharata and the Bhagavad Puran, or the Srimad Bhagavatam, as we know, as it's called. This is like these three books are the most important books that one should be reading. And on the Sant side, now of course this will change depending on which part of country you are, which part of India you are. But in general, the Sant Jnaneshwar wrote Bhagavartha Deepika, Sant Eknath wrote Bhagavad, Sant Tukaram wrote Gatha, and Sant Ramdas wrote the Dasbodh. So these 10 documents, so to say, like the Upanishads, Brahma Sutras, Bhagavad Gita, Ramayana, Mahabharata, Bhagavad Puran, and these four. These 10 books, of course, there's a lot to read. It's not something that is where you can finish it off in even in a year or something. But these are probably something that must reads. This is like ye kiya to you're pretty well versed with Hinduism and the philosophy. You don't have to go to the esoteric documents because we are not going to conduct pujas and we're not going to become priests and so on, or even for that matter philosophies, but to at least understand the philosophy and what is what is really the all this big deal about. A lot of these are highly recommended. And then of course you have Chanakya's Arthashastra if you're interested in politics and governance. Then you have Kama Sutra, then you have Nyaya Sutra, you have Mimamsa Sutra. All those sutras are also there. But primarily, as far as importance of documents is concerned, these 10 are considered very important. The Sant Prasthan can change because, as I said, this is collated by a person who is from Maharashtra. So obviously, there will be some focus on the Maharashtrian saints. But as I said, they are at least these first two columns are definitely important. Good. Then, yeah, this is the chart I have found and collected from some places. This is like the primary difference between all the schools of philosophies. Hope you can, oops. Sorry, something happened. Yeah. So this is like the main comparison of these traditions. Shaivism looks at accepts as Vedas, Upanishads and Agamas as the authority. Vaishnavism also accepts the same thing. Shakta also accepts as that. Smarta for some reason doesn't look at Agamas, only accepts Vedas and Upanishads. Supreme deity is Shiva, Vishnu, Shakti, obviously. In Smarta there is no supreme deity, it's only Brahman. The creator of the universe is Shiva, Vishnu, Shakti, Brahman. Avatar, Shaivism, there's a major importance of the avatar. In Vaishnavism, there's a key concept. There is nothing without the avatar. So Krishna is the whole and soul of Vaishnavism. So avatar is like the topmost concept there. Shaktism, there is definitely importance of the Devi and her different avatars. In the Smarta philosophy, it's not so important. Rituals and bhakti, obviously all the three sects here are important. They consider bhakti very important. And rituals also very important, whereas that's optional in this Smarta tradition. There is the ritual worship of 5 gods simultaneously. So it's not like you pick only Ganesha or Surya. It's you simultaneously worship all the 4, all the 5. Ganesha, Surya, Vishnu, Shiva, and Shakti. That's the Smartha tradition. Ahimsa and vegetarianism is again difference of opinion in some cases. Free will, Maya, and karma. Everyone accepts this beyond any concept, beyond any doubt. The metaphysics part of it is also accepted by everyone, Brahman and the Atman. It's just that all these respectively, give the form to the Brahman as well. And the means of knowledge gathering, which we discussed, as I said, these 3 schools don't accept the postulation. Negative proof and comparison and so on. Those are accepted in the Smartha tradition. The philosophy, there is slight difference. There is Dvaita, Advaita, and Vishishta Advaita. Vishishta Advaita is a special philosophy which talks of the form God and certain differences in the Brahman, certain ways of dealing with the Brahman and interacting with it. And there, of course, this avatar concept or the creator concepts also come in, whereas that doesn't come in the Smartha tradition. It's purely Advaita philosophy, which is the Brahman or the Vedanta philosophy. Those are the primary differences between these traditions. But as you can imagine, the schools of thought are not covered directly. So Mimamsa, Nyaya, those schools of thought are partly, there is partial overlap between these. Yeah, and essentially these, because there is a concept of cosmology in every school of thought as well. Like, how does this universe come into being and all those. So those things also form the part of this discussion. So each of them has its own overlaps, obviously, and some significant differences. Are these books available online? Some of these books are available online, yes. In fact, there is one website which I recently found out. I've I had sent this link on our group as well. The Mahabharata, Ramayana, and so on are also available for free. I'll send a book. It's called sacred-texts.com. It's for all religions actually. So you have to go to the Hinduism section. It contains you will find everything there, all religions of the world. Correct. So now let's go on to a bit of the symbology and the iconography. It's 3 o'clock. Do we continue?
I think we can take questions, maybe. Because we are going in. How many are pending? How many slides are pending?
Oh, okay. It's a bit, it's not much actually. It's morely this iconography part, which is like the symbols of every gods. Karma is a big topic I want to cover actually. That's an important topic I want to cover. Otherwise, the rest of the things are, and then why we worship and those things. So 3 topics, of which we can ignore the iconography part. We can discuss in 5 minutes if you like.
Sure, go ahead.
Okay, thanks. So that's obviously because it's a very important concept and very unique to Hinduism. No other religion has this concept directly, which brings in 3. So karma basically has 3 aspects. Okay, karma basically means action, work, and deed. Obviously, we all know that. But there are 3 main aspects of karma, which is the causality, which is cause and effect. So this is consistent with everything, laws of nature, laws of the way the human body is designed. If you eat something, you will fall sick. Your diseases are caused by viruses, then or bacteria or whatever. Then whatever, social, biological laws of nature, physics laws, everything. So causality comes in there. So there's no problem. And science obviously deals with this aspect primarily because it's based on facts and observation. Whereas ethics, the second aspect of karma is the ethics part or the justice part. Usko karma ka phal milna. That is this part where it comes to good karma versus bad karma and all those things. And there, that's where the concept, when you try to extend that, if you accept that, you face the consequences of your actions, and what if you die before your actions, before you face the consequences of actions? Now then, that to answer that question, you have to bring in some other concept, and that concept karma brings in, which is about the rebirth or reincarnation. That somehow there is some record maintained of your karma. uh, I think Buddhism or Jainism, one of them, uh, imagines karma as tiny particles which are stuck to your soul. I think it's Jainism. I'm not sure. So how is this record? See, this record has to be maintained somehow, right? Or somewhere it has to be maintained spiritually or whatever you call it. So the imagination is that karma is basically tiny particles. It's recorded in tiny particles which stick to your soul, and then they move out along with your soul, and then as and when you nullify the karma, those particles fall away. So that is like one idea behind this. Primarily, however, the yoga schools and Advaita Vedanta school, that is Upanishads, they focus on this current life. Okay, the afterlife is not so important. The next life is not so important. Today, this life is in your hands. Do what you can with it. And completely, yoga philosophy is primarily that, that you realize the mind-body union, and then, karma, which essentially is also habits. You are able to transcend your habits. Like if you have developed some bad habits, essentially your awareness of those habits, and then you catching yourself, Arey, I'm, doing it again. Let me not do it. That building up of awareness is also what yoga and Upanishads basically focus on. So that with your awareness build up, you break your habits and essentially change your karma. So at the very practical level, karma is basically habits, and developing good habits means doing good karma. Nothing. It's like not rocket science. And then there is three types of karma, which is sanchit karma, prarabdha karma, and kriyaman karma. Kriyaman karma is what you're doing, just what we discussed. Like, you eat good food, you will become healthy. You exercise, you will become healthy. This is kriyaman karma, which is actually your active efforts. Prarabdha karma is this life you got because of some past karma, and whatever consequences you are facing today as because of those past karmas. Whereas sanchita karma is all accumulated karma across all your lifetimes in the past. मतलब जब से Big Bang हुआ है तब से probably. So whatever karma has whatever today you are facing the consequences are primarily because of the prarabdha karma, which is the past life maybe, or very recent past karma. Whereas sanchita karma can also be there, which is like, practically speaking, if you ask me, like, how do you measure that, or how do you differentiate between prarabdha and sanchita? I don't know. Maybe it's like a very high comparison. Maybe there is some more detail on it, but I have not studied into that detail. But I will be glad of any more information there. And so in general, as far as practically treating how you treat karma is concerned, there it basically definitely these things are there. So whatever you want to do in your life, these are the 5 factors which influence the outcome. And basically these are anything. But I mean, this is completely practical. Okay, there's nothing, no metaphysics over here. Practically no metaphysics. One is your own efforts. So in exam, you must in software, you have to test it, you have to develop it. If you don't write the code, it's not going to work. Simple. So your own efforts are a must. The second is the effort and inputs of others involved. So your team members, if they don't do your work, your project is going nowhere, right? So if you have a certain project in your life where obviously you are not the only person in your life, so the effect of the effort or inputs that come from others are also going to, make a difference. Like, for example, you listen to some elders in the family, that is immediately their karma, or parayatna, their effort affecting your output, your karma. So if you listen to your teachers, if you listen to your elders, or if you don't listen to them, or you don't listen to your friends and so on, even that, that is considered parayatna. Circumstances, which is paristhiti, that depend, I mean, if you want to start a business and you say, Arey, the Indian business laws are not business friendly, you can't do much, right? Because that karma has been set by factors which are beyond your control, which come under paristhiti. They are probably someone else's karma. So the government has the prime minister's karma maybe, or whoever the people are in that institution of power and authority. So, or there are like simply environmental reasons, or there could be so many other reasons like timing. If you bring out a product in the market and it doesn't work, why? Because usko marketing mein timing bolte hain. So all these kinds of things are there. They are collective karma of so many other factors. So it's obviously very complex. But that's paristhiti. Then this past karma, the prarabdha karma, like for example, if you are working in a team and for some reason the prarabdha karma is is bad, maybe that affects things, and then it starts going towards the metaphysics part of it. And then the final thing is called grace of the gods or Dev Kripa, but in most cases we don't know how to measure it. So practically, it's like you can't know it anyway. So that's one aspect. So obviously, and that's why in the Bhagavad Gita, this renunciation from the karma phal is encouraged. That because out of at least these three, which are very true, very true factors that define the outcome, the only thing in your hand is your own efforts. So that's why you should not worry too much about things if things don't go your way. That's essentially and that's why you basically don't detach yourself from the outcome. Of course, do everything with total involvement, but detach yourself from the outcome. That comes in there. Yeah, so that's what I wanted to quickly discuss on this topic. And there was one topic of worship, why we worship and why do we worship God and so on. And there was essentially the idea of worship is again coming from the Bhakti movement primarily. It's believed that worshipping God, pleases the God, and then your punya increases, and somewhat negative karma can be offset with that. It's more of a service to the God, so it's out of act of love or devotion. So you don't expect really out of it anything. You might be grateful for something happened that nice in your life, and that's why you might worship a God, or you might want to bribe the God, to get some undeserved rewards. Because normally, as we saw, if the meant to be concept if it's not going to happen because of so many situations, don't get cut. Okay, I'm not sure. Okay, so essentially, these are the four typical reasons why one would worship a god. So either to increase your punya, or as a act of love or devotion to the god, or gratitude for something nice that happened to you, or to bribe the god for some benefit that you want. Typically, those are the reasons why one would worship. And yeah, there was more thing. I think these are types of worships and so on. I think we can skip this. And we talked about animal sacrifice. It's mostly part of tantric traditions, mostly, but it's not strictly prohibited in Hinduism, but it's very limited in where animal worship is done, animal sacrifice is done. Sorry. And alcohol also is not strictly prohibited. Mostly it's only prohibited for Brahmins, because they are into this memorization and all these scripture learning and so on. But as such, Ayurveda lists benefits of alcohol when you consume in small quantities. So wine and everything. And Somras, of course, very popular. Indra was a big fan of Somras. So yeah, as such, fermented drinks is not a problem strictly. Yeah. Gaurav wrote a comment, karma doesn't get cut. Yeah. I didn't mean that. I meant that the particles of karma that are stuck to the soul, once you face the karma, the particle kind of, falls away. That's what I meant. I didn't mean that you cancel the karma. You have to face the consequences. But once you face the consequences and you learn from those consequences and you no longer repeat those consequences, then that karma is eventually, the effect is lost, because you're doing new karma as well, right? It's not just that you're stopping some old karma. You're also doing some new karma. So doing new karma also has its consequences. So for example, if I don't study, I will fail. That is okay. But if I study, then I'm going to pass. All other things being the same, that the question paper still happens and everything. So the karma has to balance out. Obviously, I may lose a year. For example, I might drop out a year, or maybe I change my fields of education. For example, I give up medicine and I go to engineering. Those kind of things. That's the consequence. But if you do well there, then those same consequences also, the good consequences also happen. So yeah, so it's not cut. Yeah, you face the consequences. Correct. Yeah, that's like big question. Nobody knows that. Why do we get affected by our karma in the past birth when we are not aware of the same? This is a big topic of discussion based on, see, basically it's destiny versus free will. If past karma is going to define your future, then free will ko kuch matlab hai ki nahi, right? Do I even have the choice of doing something new if everything is defined by the past karma? And that is exactly what the yoga and the Vedanta philosophy focuses on. That develop awareness, develop focus of mind, develop awareness, develop a peaceful, calm, still mind, so that you become aware of what is happening, what is your action causing, and through that realization you understand that, oh, maybe if I do something different now, maybe something else will happen. And that is why this free will versus destiny is such a big topic in karma philosophy. Now, the fact that you are facing some consequences because of the past life, maybe you see, it's a matter of all this meditation and all this yoga meaning dhyana yoga. I'm not talking about exercises of yoga, but basically this meditation, this um, uh, how do you call it, sadhana. Then you have this dhyan, you have sadhana, you have samadhi, and you have chintan and manan, right, which you reflecting upon your own learnings and learn your own habits and actions and so on. So all those are ways of increasing your awareness, and that is why Rig Veda says कि insight is Brahman, pradnya eva brahmana. That is what कि तुमको जो insights आते हैं कि अरे aha moments कि this is what I have been doing, this is what has been happening, and that is why all this I am facing all these issues. If I do something different now, the consequences will change. That is why those insights have been given the same importance as Brahman, as the supreme consciousness of the universe. That you still the mind, you calm your mind down, and then you develop awareness into your actions and their consequences, and then you change them. And that's where free will comes into picture. That's how the logic is. And that is why free will is very important. And despite having all the karmas, all the prarabdha karmas and sanchita karmas, you can come out of it. And to come out of it, you have n number of lives ahead. So if you don't completely come out of it in this life, there's always the next life. That's the basic logic behind it. So free will and destiny both are possible. Soul, why we affected? Okay. Soul remains forever, body is correct. After reading so much, what is your conclusion? What is your Vedanta conclusion? I mean, I don't think I am anyway in. I mean, I get these concepts as far as the practical aspect is definitely concerned. I completely understand this. I have definitely done some meditation, and when I am a big fan of getting ideas in the toilet and in the shower. So I completely get why insight has so much of importance in Hinduism. I think I get some of that idea. Although I don't claim that I've achieved self-realization, but certainly the idea generation part of it, the aha moments that happen, because obviously when you read books, you understand technology and all that. You certainly have a lot of aha moments when you're solving problems, right? So I definitely think that I can appreciate why insights are considered as Brahman in Hindu philosophy. And then when you link it, like I said, that when you link it to your habits, and when you give same amount of thought to not just the work that you are at hand, not just probably the technology you're working on, or the work that you are doing, or whatever the house you are sleeping or sweeping, or utensils you are washing, but the moment you give that awareness to your own actions, and there are psychological techniques for that. In fact, there is something called as habit reversal therapy, HRT. It's basically done for people who are suffering from obsessive compulsive disorders, because there's no medication that can cure you of an obsessive compulsive disorder. The only way you have to develop your own awareness. And then there's something called as neuro-linguistic programming, that before you sleep or you go into a calm state of mind and you give yourself instructions, self-hypnosis. All these are basically mind training techniques. Okay. At the end of the day, at some point of time, somewhere you have to sit down quietly and give attention to your thoughts. There's no escape. You can't escape this fact. You give it whatever name you want at the end of the day. But then when you develop insights into your own behavior, in fact, there's one very nice book called as The Road Less Traveled. The Road Less Traveled. It's a book written by Dr. M. Scott Peck. He's a psychiatrist, and obviously he describes how a psychological counseling therapy goes, and he has a fantastic. I mean, I would encourage these Upanishads and everything aside. First read that book. It's such a fantastic book. That consultant or a therapist decide that this patient का इसका therapy बंद करना चाहिए, counseling therapy or counseling sessions बंद करने चाहिए. The point of stopping someone's therapy is when you become confident that that person can become his own therapist. That is what his definition of ending a therapy is. And what do you mean by being your own therapist? It means having awareness into your own habits, into your own traumas in the past, or your own whatever, and your own the way you interact with different people, and analyzing that, or giving attention to that to so much extent that you can realize, if I change my behavior, change the way I talk, change the way I say things, I could probably go to different consequences. And that awareness is a very big fact. So all that, I think that's why it has a very, that's why even when I was reading this Mimamsa and Nyaya philosophy, there's so much attention to language, how you express, the words you use, the sentences you construct, how you speak. There's so much of importance to that. And this, all this is extremely important when you are, when you're constructing your thoughts and deconstructing your thoughts and trying to understand things and all this whole blah blah thing which I talked about. Correct. You can't do much. There's not much you can do. The only thing is you can focus on your present karma. That's all you can do, because the situation is unchangeable. The परिस्थिति that you are in is not in your hands. You can't do anything. The only way is to how do you come out of it. And then because of the laws of physics and the laws of nature and the laws of society, it takes its own time. So you can't expect overnight results, obviously. There's so many laws at work, right? You can't just say, I want to fly. No, but sitting in a plane, you can fly because you're using the laws of physics and the laws of reality in the right way. After understanding those laws and so on, and why are you doing the way to, so all these understanding of the universe and the world and these aspects are essentially this inquiry, the spirit of inquiry that we talk about. And all the schools of thought, all these Nyaya philosophy and Mimamsa philosophy are all basically that, when you gather knowledge, what should you trust upon? How should you make sure that knowledge is valid or not? Whichever knowledge that be. So all these things go into that, and that's where the tradition is very different from the, although it's there, but unfortunately very less focused on in the Bhakti traditions. That is the unfortunate part. So the questioning part, introspection part cannot be escaped. Yeah, I think I spoke a lot. Any questions did I miss? Yeah, I think I covered pretty much all of those things. I don't think I missed. If I missed some question, please let me know. Or if there are other questions, please let me know. Hello, are we there?
Yeah, Kalpak.
Okay.
So I think, so thanks for this session. It was really insightful and we got some great information. So maybe we can meet again, maybe in next 15 days or week, whatever people suggest, and anyone can come up with these topics and we can have maybe some follow-up questions, PT maybe. And thank you for taking time on a Sunday. Yeah.
No, I was glad to have this.
Yeah,